It started on a Sunday. Fiona Gallagher had owned Oscar for 9 years, a Maine Coon, large even for the breed, with the tufted ears and the specific imperious dignity of a cat who had decided on his terms and expected them to be honored. He slept at the foot of the bed. He had always slept at the foot of the bed. This was not a negotiated arrangement. It was simply where he was every night for 9 years. On a Sunday in February, Fiona woke at 6:17 to find him on her chest. Not sleeping, sitting. Specifically, seated upright facing her face, one large paw resting with deliberate pressure on her sternum. He was not purring, he was not kneading. He was simply there with the stillness of a cat that has arrived at a destination and intends to remain. She moved him. He returned before she fully fell back asleep. She mentioned it to her husband that morning. He said cats were weird. She said Oscar was specifically weird in a new way, which was different. He said she was reading into things. The following Sunday, same time. The following Wednesday. By the end of the second week, it had become a morning event. Oscar migrating from the foot of the bed to her chest at some point between 5 and 7 a.m., and sitting there with his paw against her sternum until she woke fully and moved him. She was 58. She was a retired teacher. She was not a person who ordinarily attributed meaning to cat behavior beyond what was observable. She had said this to herself several times. She also had a persistent awareness, which she had not mentioned to her husband, that her heart had felt slightly irregular in the mornings for several weeks. Not painful, irregular. The specific quality of a beat that sometimes arrived early or late or both. If you stay for stories about what animals sense before we do, you're in the right place. Subscribe so you don't miss the next one. She made a GP appointment at week 4. The GP ordered an ECG. The ECG was read by her own GP as normal. She went home. Oscar continued. At week 6, she saw a cardiologist, not because she was frightened. She was not a person who catastrophized, but because she was a person who had spent 32 years teaching children to follow evidence to conclusions, and the evidence in this case was accumulating. One large cat. 6 weeks, every morning, her sternum. The cardiologist was a woman named Dr. Ingrid Solberg, 53, who had been in cardiology for 24 years, and who wore the specific, focused patience of someone who had learned that the interesting cases were rarely the first-look ones. She ordered a 48-hour Holter monitor. Fiona wore it for the designated period and returned it. The reading showed paroxysmal atrial fibrillation, episodes of an irregular heart rhythm occurring primarily in the early morning hours, self-terminating, not yet symptomatic in the clinical sense but present, documented and requiring management. Dr. Solberg reviewed the monitor record with her. She explained the condition. She explained the management options, and then, in the straightforward manner of a physician who had been in this specialty long enough to take all available information seriously, she asked about the cat. Fiona told her. The 6 weeks. The mornings. The paw on the sternum. The specific timing that overlapped. She now realized exactly what the window in which the arrhythmia was occurring. Has your cat ever done something you couldn't explain until it was the only thing that made sense? Tell us in the comments. These stories deserve to be heard. Dr. Solberg was quiet for a moment. Cats have significant cardiac physiological sensitivity, she said. They can detect low-frequency vibrations, rhythm irregularities in heartbeat, through the chest wall, and chemical changes in breath and skin associated with cardiac events. In a cat that sleeps regularly with a person, that is calibrated to that person's normal heartbeat over years, an irregularity would represent a significant deviation from baseline. She looked at the monitor record. Your arrhythmia was occurring between approximately 4 and 7 a.m. The cat was waking you during that window. She prescribed flecainide. The arrhythmia resolved on monitoring at 8 weeks. Oscar returned to the foot of the bed. Not gradually, abruptly, within the first week of the medication, as if the thing he had been attending to was no longer present and therefore no longer required attendance. He was there in the morning when Fiona woke. He stayed there. Every guardian deserves to be recognized, even the ones who never asked for anything in return. If stories like this matter to you, subscribe so you never miss the next one. She lay in the early morning of the second week on medication and looked at the lump of large cat at the foot of the bed. The specific comfortable lump of an animal settled back into its established place, and thought about the 6 weeks, about the foot of the bed and the chest, about the paw and the sternum. She thought about her husband saying she was reading into things. Oscar twitched one ear without opening his eyes. He was asleep. He was at the foot of the bed where he had always been. Whatever had moved him was no longer there. She was a person who had spent 32 years teaching children to follow evidence to conclusions. She was also, this morning, a 58-year-old woman in a quiet room who had been told by a cardiologist that her cat had noticed her arrhythmia before any machine confirmed it, and that the window in which the cat had been sitting on her chest corresponded exactly to the window in which the irregular rhythm was occurring. She reached down and put her hand on the warm bulk of him and held it there and thought, well, he was right. The next story is about a dog who stood at the same window in his owner's house for 2 weeks. The family thought he was watching for squirrels. What the building inspector found behind that wall changed their understanding of what the dog had been watching. Subscribe so you're there when it posts.